All right. So good morning, Coalition. It's great to see everybody today. We have already hit the record button, so we're ready to begin this Friday Facts for January 28th, my goodness, 28th, 2022. And we've got a wonderful interview with Nate Denny, but let me just mention an announcement or two. Our Friday Facts for next week is with our very own Shane Lucas, the owner of A Great Idea. And you've seen Shane helping us a lot over the years with our website and a whole bunch of different things, but you're going to see a different side of Shane as we interview him. But and I think those are the only announcements that we really need to make this morning. So I want to get right into this great interview with Nate Denny. Nate is the Deputy Secretary for Digital Equity in the Department of Information Technology for the state of North Carolina. So we'll get right into this. So Nate, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you did growing up, where you grew up.
Sure, happy to. Morning, everybody. Nate Denny. I'm heading up Broadband and Digital Equity effort for the North Carolina Department of Information Technology now. Native North Carolinian. My father was a Methodist minister, is a Methodist minister, and so we bounced all over North Carolina, mainly Eastern North Carolina. For those of you familiar, in the North Carolina Conference is basically Burlington to the coast, and so we were all over that, from Mebane to Ocracoke Island. So grew up mostly in kind of northeastern North Carolina, Bertie County, so Windsor, Elizabeth City, Ocracoke, and got the chance to go to UNC Chapel Hill and studied there. And from there, worked in my first couple of jobs in North Carolina politics for a political consultant to then Governor Easley. And from there, went to law school up at the University of Richmond. Left Richmond for, knew that I wanted to do public service. And forgive me, there's a 3.5-year-old busting into the room right now. So I'm glad you're recording this.
Not a problem.
It happens. Knew that I wanted to go into public service and had a chance to get into federal service through the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, which funnels graduate students and law students into federal agency work. I'm really thrilled to see there's a Bertie County native on this call. That's great. Hi. And spent about 8 years in Washington, D.C. For the duration of the Obama administration. Met my now wife there, and she and I ended the administration both as appointees. So we both had jobs that disappeared on January 20th, 2017. And she's also from North Carolina, and we thought this is a perfect opportunity to go back home. So she came back and worked for UNC Chapel Hill, and I joined the Governor Cooper's administration at DIT in the technology department. My whole federal service was at the U.S. General Services Administration, which is the really not sexy agency that handles government real estate, IT, and procurement. And so from there, I think the state's IT department kind of made sense, right? Handling IT procurement, cybersecurity, and increasingly something called broadband, which I hadn't really worked in before, right? I had kind of touched on it at GSA because we were always interested in figuring out how our federal buildings, how the government's real estate footprint could be leveraged for like wireless equipment, right? Like something mounted on the roof of a building that could serve a downtown area, something like that. But hadn't really dug into it, and found as the department's legislative liaison, working with the General Assembly, that broadband was the only thing anybody cared about. And in North Carolina's Department of Information Technology, I know Christy Burris is a regular member of this group. He runs our HIE. But DIT is a really traditional IT services operation. So like network support, desktop, IT procurement, like how do agencies get the stuff they need to carry out their mission? Not really taxpayer facing, right? Not really solving problems on the ground. A really important back end work, right? That helps every agency achieve its goals, its mission, and serve the people of North Carolina. But not much that was just direct service to people. And that whole IT services operation is like 600 million a year recurring, basically. And all of a sudden, our broadband folks, are the people that everyone cares most about in the department, and now they have $1 billion, right? So now with the American Rescue Plan, Governor Cooper and the General Assembly agreed to dedicate more than $1 billion to closing the digital divide once and for all in North Carolina. And for my legislative and the chief of staff work at DIT, they asked me to kind of help us build that division and organize ourselves in a way to execute that mission. So that's the really, really long, windy way that I got here where I am.
Well, that's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And it's good to have a Bertie County person, or at least that knows Bertie County, because Mary is telling us about that on a regular basis. And it's great.
The longest place I ever lived in one place. The longest time I was 6 years growing up there. So it's really kind of home. I moved right before graduating high school, unfortunately, but that was really the center of gravity for my childhood.
Gotcha. Well, it's a good place to be from. And I understand that because my dad was a Presbyterian minister. So okay. I'm a PK as well. So I certainly appreciate that. And I know some of the challenges of being a PK. So that's great. So Nate, tell us a little bit about what it meant for you to move back to North Carolina and become part of this administration's efforts.
Thank you for the chance to talk about that. I this is all going to be really cheesy, so just bear with me. But some combination of seeing my dad's service in the Methodist Church in the communities where we were assigned, and the privilege and luck of finding the right mentors at Carolina really hammered home the urgency of public service for me. I had two great mentors at Chapel Hill, both of whom have passed away in the last couple of years. One just this year, John Sanders, who used to run the School of Government at Carolina, who really hammered home this old Bill Friday quote. And this is where I'm going to get cheesy, but Bill Friday said to one of his classes, every day 1 million North Carolinians wake up, work for menial wages, and pay for you to have as free an education as is practicable under the Constitution. And your job is to spend the rest of your life figuring out how to pay them back. And that is about as clear a mission statement as I think you can get, right? I mean, that is, total, like I said, total privilege to have just stumbled into the path of these mentors at Carolina, but they hammered it into my head. And it was like the only thing I took away from, bad grades, good mission statement, right? That was really what I knew I wanted to do. And so kind of started working, like I said, in North Carolina politics for a political consultant named Mac McCorkle, who was based out of Durham and who advised Governor Easley, then Lieutenant Governor Perdue, Congressman David Price, and a whole host of other candidates across the country, really. And always knew that I wanted to do more in public service. And so, I went to law school with the somewhat silly view that law school is like a permission slip to do public service, which is not a way that I would recommend anyone decide whether they would go to law school at all, having done it now. But then, knew that I wanted to get the federal government experience, but the whole time I was there, wanted to figure out a path back, right? I mean, that was the I'm going to do this, I'm going to do the DC thing, which was incredible, loved it. insane privilege to be a part of the Obama administration, and I'm so proud and grateful for what we were able to achieve in that time. But I knew I wanted to come home and get back here and do more. And I'm just really lucky that there was and grateful for that luck that there was a chance to get back to service here, and really, again, kind of stumble on a mission that can really do more to help North Carolinians at scale than just about anything else going on in government right now. So that's, again, another windy path.
Well, no, that's very helpful, and it's not cheesy at all. I think, our coalition, the folks here understand that in spades, because they're doing the hard work every day of either being a caregiver or helping with caregiving, or with advanced care planning, or with clinical practice, or in communications and advocacy, and we're all trying to do things that will advance the lot of somebody who's got a serious illness. And the definition that we use, that we built at the NCIOM task force on serious illness care, was that if somebody has a serious illness, they're not expected to live for another year. So having you come and tell us about that is very meaningful. So thank you. So you got back here to North Carolina, and you began to work in this information technology world. And we also appreciate, because not too many of us are technology folks. Me
neither.
Yeah, I mean, so that's helpful. And then COVID hit 2 years ago.
Right.
What did that mean to you, particularly in this world? And you said, more money came, but what was the impression you had when we got this pandemic?
We just went into a sprint trying to figure out how to get all of state government remote capable, right? In my agency, DIT, everyone had a laptop, could easily get home for work, right? We're like a 1,100 person agency now, and had like 17 people who had to be on site, right? So the folks who staff the data center, right, and they've got to be there, but really everyone else could go home and support other agencies from where they were. But other agencies didn't necessarily have that same capability, or at least couldn't make that transition as easily. So, initially we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how, will our VPN connections be able to sustain the level of demand, right? And frankly, nobody knew if the country's bandwidth would support everyone working from home remotely, right? And that's actually been a really pleasant surprise for those of us who are fortunate enough to live somewhere where there's an internet connection in the first place. It's all kind of held up pretty well, right? We're doing so many darn Teams and Zoom meetings now. It's really worked, I think, very effectively, both in government and outside. But it really became clear very quickly that in an economy that was forced to function virtually, right, digitally, an already problematic challenge of not having an internet connection, or not being able to afford it, or not having the device or even skills to use the internet, which was already hurting people, was really leaving people behind once everyone else shifted online, right? And I think COVID drove home how urgent closing the digital divide is for every aspect of our life, right? So my wife and I have both been working from home more or less for the last couple of years. I go in a few days a week to the office, but mainly have been at home. Our kids now are 1.5 and 3.5. So fortunately, I really feel for the parents who have like elementary school kids, right, who have to actually learn things. It was really hard having our 2 toddlers home but at least they didn't really need to learn things other than like how to navigate the floor and exist and stay alive, right? We didn't have to teach them anything, of real complexity. We had, and again, we were privileged enough to live in a place at the time just south of downtown Durham where we had a fiber connection, right? And so if one of my kids was sick during a global pandemic, I could log on to my UNC, right, to my chart and access a telemedicine appointment with UNC Pediatrics for my kids without having to sit in a waiting room with other kids who may be sick, right? And that has been a really fortunate thing for my family. But we also have to remember it's not just a public health crisis, it's an economic crisis, right? And so we had people losing jobs, searching for jobs, trying to access unemployment benefits, right? Trying to get basic government services, and trying to figure out how to find work that isn't based in their community. And for all of that, you need a high-speed internet connection, right? For all of it. And in North Carolina, we have a relatively good internet. We've got a relatively good level of access in North Carolina compared to the Southeast, but there's still a lot of people that don't have it. And there are even more people who have an option. They could subscribe, but they can't afford the average cost of like $65 a month for internet service. And then there are other people who don't even have a laptop or much less a smartphone, right? Or don't have the skills to use any of those tools well. So, I think COVID made us all focus on a problem that already existed, right? And it became really clear that problem affected every single aspect of our lives today in this modern economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And COVID continues to impact us, but the technology has, as you said, has grown to address a lot of it. But you're the Deputy Secretary for Digital Equity. Tell us what that equity piece means and how you're addressing it.
Well, it's for broadband and digital equity. And, we've had a broadband infrastructure office at DIT for a number of years now. And when people think about the problems of the digital divide, they think about running a fiber line by your house, right? They think about the infrastructure. And that's the thing we've seen funded at a high level. But again, that's not the whole thing. I can run a line through your front yard, and if you can't afford it or you don't have the device, you still are left behind, right? So digital equity is kind of a term of art that means that every community and every individual should have access to a connection, the ability to afford it, and the devices and skills necessary to fully leverage it to participate in the digital economy and democracy, right? That's digital equity, right? And importantly, it's making sure that that those opportunities are presented to everyone in different demographic groups, right? Because North Carolina has had a pretty strong recovery, right, from the economic side of COVID, but not everybody's recovering at the same speed, right? And we've got to recognize that. And we've got to put the work in to make sure that many different communities can fully leverage the investments we're making. In North Carolina, about 76% of white households have a high-speed internet subscription. The Black, Latino, and Native American households all lag considerably behind that, from the mid 60s down to the high 50 percentile range. And so we've got to make sure, if we're going to spend $1 billion for this purpose, we've got to make sure that we are really reaching into those communities. And Governor Cooper has been very clear from the beginning about not just wanting to invest in the infrastructure side of it, but really maintaining that equity focus throughout, right? Making those investments in a targeted way that benefits all communities and really make sure that everyone can access those opportunities.
Okay, that's very helpful. When you mention the ability to pay for internet and to pay for those kinds of things. We know that there's a pretty big chunk of folks that are maybe out in rural communities. And we hear about this on a fairly regular basis because it addresses the population that we're looking at here. How are you looking at addressing that challenge for people in a rural community that, you know, might not even have a good education, let alone the ability to operate a digital machine, you know, to be able to log on like we are doing today?
I think there are three major components there, and it kind of tracks along the angles of that equity definition. But first, we've got to make the investments necessary to make sure that all these communities have access, right? That the technology is in place, that the networks are in place for them to connect in the first place. We've got to figure out how to address the cost, and then we've got to promote community-driven skills development and device opportunities. Governor Cooper proposed a $1.2 billion plan to do all that using American Rescue Plan funds. We really, you know, COVID's a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. This connectivity is a lifetime generational level challenge. And I hear you. But we've also got really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with the federal funding that's been made available to states for recovery, right? And so Governor Cooper's plan was to spend about half of that money on infrastructure expansion or deployment, and divide the other half between $420 million to help subsidize the cost of internet service for low-income North Carolinians, and about $165 million for getting devices to low-income households, developing skills and training, community grant programs. The General Assembly went big on infrastructure, and they gave us money for digital equity and literacy for awareness and training, which was a really welcome negotiation outcome. We were very pleased with that, but they weren't willing to do anything on the subsidy piece, right? And so what we've got to do in the meantime is make more North Carolinians aware of the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, which has a $30 a month subsidy for low-income households, as defined by a number of criteria. I think 200% of federal poverty, free and reduced lunch, right, and other kind of similar federal criteria defining low-income households. North Carolina already has 342,000 families or households enrolled in that FCC subsidy program. Since we didn't get money to further subsidize the cost of internet, we're going to spend some of our resources driving awareness of that program and making sure North Carolina maxes out its eligible enrollment, right? So every eligible North Carolina household should be benefiting from that $30 discount on their internet service. And I think that's really, really key here, particularly in the rural parts of the state, places, you know, like Bertie County, right, where there aren't a lot of other opportunities. We've got to make sure that we can address cost in that area. And then last but certainly not least is, I think we've got to build training and grant opportunities for communities, not in a top-down way, but where we can kind of seed an ecosystem of digital literacy work with local organizations, local schools across the state, healthcare providers as well across the state. So that's how we're gonna attack it, and how I think we can benefit those rural, poorer parts of the state too. Although it's worth noting that this is not just a rural problem, right? This is, you know, Raleigh has excellent coverage of infrastructure, but huge numbers of people who can't afford it or don't have a device, right? And there are pockets of Raleigh that have, in the poorer parts of the county and city, that have bad service too. So I think we need to make sure that everyone understands it's not, this is not just a rural problem, although that's where you see it most heavily concentrated.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's very helpful. So we're particularly interested here at the Serious Illness Coalition in two particular areas. One is telehealth, and I know you're very engaged in that. And I'm not going to ask you to get into a lot of specifics about that, but and we only have a few minutes left. But tell us a little bit about telehealth and how that is developing, and then also we have a bill that we have sponsored and is passed the Senate, but has not gotten approved by the House yet, on advanced care planning or advanced directives and power of attorney for people with serious illness. And we want to digitize that and make it available. And that's what that bill provides for. And that's where we've been talking with Christy and her HIE. But anyway, if you could address those two things in the remaining couple of minutes that we've got, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I think first, I'm not familiar with that specific legislation, but I'll talk to Christy and get up to speed. But certainly, department is supportive of, our main focus is kind of digital transformation, right, across government in particular. And so it certainly sounds consistent with our goals for helping North Carolinians access services from wherever they are, right? And I see a question there. Yes, happy to. I'll put my email address down in the chat before I go. On the telemedicine side, and again, I'm not the healthcare expert, right? But our digital equity team is working closely with DHHS's Office of Rural Health, and now its Aging Division as well, to figure out how to particularly get devices and awareness skills development into the communities we're talking about, those underserved or unserved communities across the state. Again, access to healthcare services, that's a basic core right here that we need to be enabling and making sure that our investments support. I think what Governor Cooper's mission statement is a better educated, healthier, and wealthier state of North Carolina, where folks are free to live lives of purpose and abundance. And healthcare service is absolutely critical there. So that is certainly an area where, one, we want to keep working closely with our state government partners to do more and help support access, right? But also where I think we'll be looking to the healthcare community to participate in our grant programs and come to us with innovative ideas, right? So I'd say to your audience here, two things before we run out of time that I would love for you to do is, one, find out a way for your stakeholders to learn more, particularly about that affordable connectivity program from the FCC. And I'll follow up with you to share some information about that. But that's a really useful thing for your constituents, your stakeholders. And then also just to stay tuned as our programming on the digital equity side evolves. I think there will be opportunities for, like I said, nonprofits, education groups, local governments, and so on and so forth to seek funds for a range of digital literacy needs. And I think telemedicine is going to be a really important focus for that program.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that, because one of my last questions was going to be, how can we help or how can we be involved? And you've just addressed that. So yeah. Thank you so much. We are just about at the top of the hour. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for joining us, Nate. It's been great to learn a little bit more about you and the focus that the Department of Information Technology has. Please keep us in mind, and we will keep you in mind and continue to interact. Do put your email. There we go. You got it. And we'll make that available to folks. Remember that we are recording this and it'll be up on our website very shortly. So again, thank you so much. And it's been great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to hear from you. Bye.
Thanks for all you do.
And thanks to all of you as well.
Take care. Y'all have a great rest of your week.